or reading the customary law of marriage of elements that discriminated against women. The Act makes provision for customary marriages in two ways. Firstly, all marriages prior to the Act that were valid in terms of African customary law are valid for all legal purpose. This did away with the ambivalence in South African history towards the legitimacy of African marriages. And secondly, all marriages conducted in terms of African customary law after the Act came into force are valid if they fulfill the Act's requirements. Both customary marriages and civil marriages could be registered at Home Affairs. The Act accommodates what might be called common law provisions in areas of minors' marriages, the status of spouses, and as well as the proprietary consequences of marriage and divorce. And more on this, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Advocate Kagiso Maphalle, the General Manager at National Heritage Council. Ma'am, good evening, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak to you.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
I've read a long paragraph, but I know speaking to you today would make it easier, especially for our listeners. But before we talk more on the issue, just tell us, I've mentioned titles, and I know you don't like them. But I told you that it's important for people to know your achievements because you can inspire them. Every day we hear bad news or we watch telenovelas, but it's not every day we get to embrace our own, and especially our young own. So your full names and how old are you? First, I want they, so they feel what I'm talking about.
Are we? I know there's a thing that women are not allowed to give away their age.
You can do a range there, like a 3 years range there.
No, don't worry. So what do you need me to start with? My full name?
Yes, your full names and titles. Every young can.
No, but you have already said. So it's the titles as we have stated them, and my names are Kagiso Maphalle. I am 28 years old.
Listen to that. Inspiration right there. Don't need to read a book. Just follow the correct young people. And your qualifications are
LOB, LLM, PhD.
Listen to that, ladies and gentlemen. This is just good news. It's something that you read and know about people, and especially you speak to them, because usually when people talk about academics, they talk about people that are not within our reach, but you are in our reach. You are in our generation, and you are even accessible, and that's a good thing. You did it at Univen.
I'm glad to hear that.
You did it at Univen.
My LOB, yes, I studied at the University of Venda, and my postgrad studies, the master's and the PhD at the University of Cape Town.
Listen to that. All right, so what is it that you do? I said that you're a general manager at the National Heritage Council. What is the National Heritage Council?
The National Heritage Council is the entity that is tasked with managing, protecting, and telling the nation of South Africa about the heritage of South Africa, be it intangible heritage that speaks to our cultures, our traditions, our customs, our practices, or our history, folklore. And our tangible heritage is the heritage sites that are within South Africa. An example of those is Robben Island, the Hector Peterson Museum, and Table Mountain, and many others within the country.
At second year we did African law, and the first thing that we learned was that South Africa uses a pluralistic law. And when I think about it, I realize it's not really pluralistic in that way, because at the end of the day, you still have your customs that must suit a constitution. So section 2 of the constitution, I always felt it undermines the cultures that exist. And I know somebody would say, but it's there to protect women.
Of course. I think what you are saying is what many people within the field of African customary law feel, that the fact that African customary law is subject to provisions of the Constitution somehow makes it inferior to a certain extent.
Yes.
And there are research projects that have been done about that. There are papers that have been written on that. As a scholar in the field who has done research and has studied African customary law, I tend to agree to a certain extent. But as a champion of women and children's rights, I understand the importance of customary law being subject to the Constitution, because then that subjection allows for the entire customary law system to be developed in line with provisions not only of the Constitution but of international human rights as they are applied to women and children. You would know, and I believe many people would know, especially those who live within the African context, that in previous times, women and children did not have rights as we know them today. So that subjection makes it possible for women and children to have rights and to have those rights protected and to have platforms where they can go and have those rights asserted where a human rights violation has taken place. So it's a dual situation where, to a certain extent, it does subject African customary law to a position of inferiority, because as we have seen and as we know, it always takes a back seat to other systems of law. As you have mentioned that there's a pluralistic system, it actually does exist. And it is seen more especially in relation to customary law, where we deal with issues of marriage and succession and inheritance.
At the beginning, when I was talking about you, and this is before I phoned you because I knew you will just keep on smiling, was that I said that you have won 2018. And one of the reasons why I'm saying this is because you've traveled, you were on a program in the US, and just kindly tell us more about the program and what was the aim? Yeah.
The program that I went to is called the Mandela Washington Fellowship, and it is a program where young African leaders apply to it who are making significant contributions in their respective fields. There are 3 tracks. It's business and entrepreneurship, it's civic leadership, and it's public management. So I was in the civic leadership track because of the work that I do through my foundation, the Kagiso Maphalle Foundation, where I empower rural communities on issues of customary law and the Constitution. And I workshop them on the provisions of customary law legislation as it applies to their everyday lives and how they can develop their customary legal systems within their communities to be in compliance with the Constitution. I was also on the program because of the research work that I do in the field of African customary law that champions for the rights of women and children. So it is an amazing experience that I encourage young Africans in South Africa to apply for, because it exposes them to, firstly, a network of African leaders from within the continent, and also the amazing things that can and are being done with regards to development, especially rural economic development. But also it is a platform that allows a young person to see that active leadership is important in order for change to take place within our communities.
Yeah,
if one person stands up and does something about what concerns them, then a lot of change can be done. And this goes back to the work that I do within the National Heritage Council as a general manager, because I'm tasked with dealing with the core functions of the institution and ensuring that the heritage of South Africa is protected and that it is portrayed on an international level in order to attract investment, but also tourism, so that people come into the country and visit these heritage sites, and that empowers the entrepreneurs within those heritage site spaces who are mostly within rural communities and are in need of economic development.
So before, I want us to just take you back on the Washington program. And I want you to tell our listeners as to how can you apply and what must you have done in order for you to feel like you qualify for the entire program.
Oh, wow. I think perhaps maybe because the applications for next year's cohort actually closed on the 10th. That was yesterday. So they can no longer apply, unfortunately, to be part of the cohort for 2019. But I will give you the link, and we can have a discussion at a later stage when the new call comes up, so that I can take them through the application process and what is required of them, so that they can prepare for the 2020 application and know in advance the kind of leader they need to be and the kind of impact that they need to be demonstrating within their respective communities. That will then prepare them to be eligible for the 2020 cohort, because for 2019 the application has already closed.
Yeah. All right. I will be with you next year. We will talk about this to assist, especially ladies, because I believe that there's need for more empowerment, for more female empowerment, especially in the local communities. Like, I know we talk about it at national level, but at national level, it doesn't really reach the ears that it needs to. It's those communities, especially in the rural areas, especially in the township, where they are faced with a lot of questions and a lot of things around them that most of them don't even in any way empower them. Let's talk about specifically your foundation. You did briefly mention what you do, but how can one access the foundation?
The foundation at present can be accessed through me, through my social media platforms. If there is a need for me to come to a specific community and to workshop a specific community about a piece of legislation that relates to women and children's rights within customary law systems. And I think we will, at the end of the day, at the end of our conversation, give them my social media handles, and they can send me a direct message inbox and make that request. And I request that when they make that request, can they please be clear about where they're coming from, what they require assistance with, but the specific issue or topic that they need to be addressed and how it is linked to women and children's rights and customary law. Then, depending on my availability, I will do my best to go to that community, liaise with them, make the arrangements, and come and share the knowledge with them.
I want to exhaust us talking about you, because I need people to know you and I need people to understand what you do, because it's important. For me, I think we've sidelined customary law a lot to advance Western or civil ideas. And I know people will say, but because communities live in urban areas and communities have become small, we interact. But at the end of the day, I still believe we need to know where we come from. How did we survive? Because there's nothing that says back in the old times everything was wrong. There's no evidence of such. And we've seen our grandmothers grow up to become wonderful people that end up raising us. So tell us more on and specifically what you do. You talked about tangible and intangible. Let's talk more about the intangible part of your work.
Well, firstly, I will respond to the issue about us as a people moving more towards the modern or westernized version of doing things. I think that is a struggle that not only South Africa but all other African countries are dealing with, and it is a result of colonization. And I think it's a process that unfortunately cannot be reversed. But what can be done to mitigate it is, yes, to go back to the way things were being done in the past, especially looking at the positive things that we can take from there and apply to our current everyday lives. But I think the problem that exists is that we must not have or perpetuate the misconception that everything was rosy in the past. The current interventions that are taking place are as a result of things not having been perfect in the past. So in as much as there are amazing things that we can learn from the way things were being done in the past from previous generations, there are things that we need to leave behind there and not take them into our everyday lives. And the aspect of intangible heritage speaks to the culture, the tradition, the customs and practices of the diverse cultural groups that exist within South Africa. And it deals with issues of how marriages are entered into and celebrated. It deals with issues of inheritance and succession. It deals with issues of traditional leadership. It deals with the rituals, the customs that refer to your initiation practices for both men and women, girls and boy children. It also addresses the dances, the artistic expressions of cultural communities as they celebrate their heritage. It refers to the folklore, the stories that are passed on from generation to generation.
Yes.
It refers also to the idioms and terms that are used within our different language spaces in order to preserve our heritage. You wanted to say something?
No, I said Dikali-DM. I remember when you talk about idioms, I know people will be saying, hey, now we're going deep. Dikali-DM.
Yes, Dikali-DM. It forms part of intangible heritage. So largely the part of the work that I do here, or that is largely done by my team, is that they focus on preserving that heritage and making it accessible to South Africans and also to the international community, because it forms part